Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. So if you guys clicked on this video today, then you already obviously know we're going to be comparing the brand new DJI Mavic 3 to the drone that I've been flying for a long time now and completely love, which is the DJI Air 2S. Now, I know a lot of you guys are probably expecting this video a lot earlier, but the reason I took my sweet time comparing these two drones is that, you know, sometimes when you fly something brand new like the DJI Mavic 3, you might have some recency bias and you'll be like, oh my god, this is the best drone that I've ever flown. But then a couple days later, you'll go and fly the Air 2S and you'll be like, hey, I can't really tell a difference in the image quality. Now that's pretty significant because in the US, the Fly More combo for the DJI Mavic 3 costs $2,800, and that is a lot of cash. And comparatively, the Air 2S Fly More combo costs about $1,300. So if you're someone who's been on the fence about upgrading to the Mavic 3 from the DJI Air 2S, or maybe you have neither of these drones and you're trying to figure out which one you're gonna buy, today we're gonna figure out if this drone is actually worth double the price of this one. So if that's something you're interested in, then definitely stick around. Okay, so let's get the main difference out of the way first. The DJI Mavic 3 has a micro 4/3 inch sensor and the DJI Air 2S has a 1-inch sensor. So the Mavic 3 has a bigger sensor. Both drones are capable of recording in a 5K resolution. So the Mavic 3 standard version is able to record in 5.1K at up to 50 frames per second, and the DJI Air 2S can record in up to 5.4K at 30 frames per second. So depending on your use case, the DJI Air 2S actually shoots in a higher resolution than the Mavic 3. But here's what I'll say about resolution. Most of our phone screens and laptops and computers are pretty much maxed out at 4K, and if you're looking at things on your phone, it's usually maxed out at 1080p. So for me, I'd rather have a bigger sensor than more resolution, because the sensor is going to let in a lot more light and a lot more information, thus giving you better dynamic range and a better picture quality overall. But having said that, I'm actually gonna have some footage playing from both the Air 2S and the DJI Mavic 3, and that way you guys can be the judges and decide for yourself which footage you think is better, or if you can really even tell a difference between the two. Now, personally, I do see the difference, but is it doubly better than the Air 2S? No way. The difference is actually really minuscule, and you really have to know what you're looking for in order to be able to tell the difference. Now, both drones have 10-bit color and can both shoot in D-Log. So if you're a filmmaker who's on a budget and you can't really afford the Mavic 3, then get the Air 2S and focus on things like color and composition and framing your shots. With the freedom of 10-bit and that D-Log color profile, you can do a ton of things in post to completely transform your Air 2S footage and have it looking super professional to the point where people don't even know what drone is shot with. Now, I'm gonna put up a video that I recently posted on Instagram that got a ton of love, and I had so many people asking me if this was shot with the Mavic 3, and because I was traveling, I didn't want to carry the Mavic 3 due to its weight, so I actually took the Air 2S, and yeah, all this footage was straight from the Air 2S. Now, the Mavic 3 does shoot in 4K at 120 frames per second, which the Air 2S is not capable of. The Air 2S caps out at 4K at 60 frames per second. Now, for slow motion, 60 frames per second is usually good enough, but I will say that 120 FPS on the Mavic 3 is pretty nice to have. But again, if you're someone who doesn't mind stepping down in resolution a little bit, you can get that 120 frames per second on the DJI Air 2S as well. You just have to step down down to 2.7K. So it's all about use case. If you're someone who needs super slow motion at 4K, then the Mavic 3 might be worth it to you, but we touched on resolution earlier and it's not really the biggest deal. So for me, this is not really a deal breaker. Another one of the Mavic 3's biggest advantages over the DJI Air 2S is that it has variable aperture, which ranges from f2.8 all the way up to f11. And the DJI Air 2S is fixed at an aperture of f2.8. Now, the variable aperture does come in handy when you want to shoot certain subjects and you want to kind of manipulate your exposure. But if you're flying the Air 2S, you can remedy most of these issues using ND filters. So if you're willing to put in the work and maybe just a little bit more of the cost to buy some good quality ND filters, you can remedy most of the issues that come with fixed aperture, and you can probably save yourself that $1,400 difference between the DJI Air 2S and the Mavic 3 if variable aperture is the only thing that you're buying the Mavic 3 for over the DJI Air 2S. Next up, let's talk about photography on these two drones. Now, both drones shoot 20 megapixel stills in both JPEG and in RAW. Now, the Mavic 3 does have a bigger sensor, meaning it'll let in more light and capture more detail, but about that, I took a bunch of photos with both drones and I honestly couldn't really tell the difference between the quality in both. Sure, the Mavic 3 does have more dynamic range and you can tell sometimes, but most of the time the images look pretty much the same to me or of equal quality, and I'll throw up some of those so you guys can once again judge for yourselves. So in my personal opinion, the Mavic 3 is not worth the photography upgrade over the DJI Air 2S. The DJI Air 2S is more than capable as a photography drone, and you will definitely not be disappointed if that's the one that you decide to go with for all of your photography needs. Both drones still use OcuSync 3.0 and the same controller, unless you decide to get the DJI Mavic 3 Cine version, which comes with the Pro Controller V2, which we'll touch on at the end. But both drones, by the time the Mavic 3 firmware update rolls around, are expected to have the same feature in terms of modes and capabilities. So like master shots, pano shots, quick shots, things like that. And so at the end of the day, most of the features will be consistent across the two drones, which means that the main difference that we've identified so far between the two drones that is really significant is the sensor size. Now, a lot of people are going to be asking, what about the telecamera on the Mavic 3? And here's what I'll say about the telecamera on the Mavic 3. Nobody should be buying this drone for the purpose of this camera alone. From a photography and a video perspective, it's currently pretty much useless. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it's not optical zoom. This camera is a digitally zoomed camera, and DJI themselves have labeled it Explore mode, meaning that I'm pretty sure DJI's intention is for you to use that camera to kind of look at things far away that you might be interested in and then fly towards them. It's not meant to be used as a photography and a filmmaking tool. And that's just my opinion. I just think the footage is completely garbage and unusable. Also, whenever you enter this Explore mode, basically lose all manual camera exposure control. So you're stuck at using automatic controls and you're basically at the mercy of the drone, which also sucks and takes away a lot of potential. Now, if you're really interested in the zoom feature, the DJI Air 2S is also capable of zooming in up to 4x at 4K at 30 frames per second. And I've actually recorded some footage using the 2x on the Air 2S just when I was in a situation where there was a large crowd and I needed to zoom in. I didn't feel comfortable flying the drone that close to people. So it does have its use cases and it's definitely useful, but both drones kind of have the zoom function. And the Air 2S doesn't have the gimmick of that double lens and trying to sell you on that 28x zoom. So if you're buying the Mavic 3 just for that telecamera, I highly recommend that you just don't. And finally, let's talk about APAS 5.0 and Active Track 5.0. Now, in my opinion, this is where the Mavic 3 really shines, and let me explain why. It really has to do with all of these sensors that are on the Mavic 3, including the side sensors over here and over here. So hopefully you guys can see that. The Air 2S does not have these sensors. And basically the Mavic 3 is able to conduct omnidirectional flight because of these additional sensors, meaning that it can detect objects in every direction when it's flying. Now that's a huge advantage over the DJI Air 2S, and I really do wish that it had side sensors because I would feel a lot more confident trusting the system, but usually I just turn off all the sensors and fly manually because it just doesn't have side sensors. So I think that's an awesome feature on the Mavic 3. Also on APAS 5.0, the Mavic 3 is able to sense objects about 200 meters in front of it. And I think the Mavic 2 Pro is only able to do about 20 meters. So that's almost like 1,000% increase. So the Mavic 3 is super safe to fly, and it's pretty revolutionary in terms of its sensor system. So it definitely has that over the Air 2S. And because of APAS 5.0, it actually has Active Track 5.0, which I've had the opportunity to test, and it's not available to the public yet, but hopefully should be coming out in a firmware update in January, which is what DJI has said. But Active Track 5.0 really is amazing and really revolutionary, but because of the sensors and the sensors on the drone and the new camera sensor size, the drone's really able to pick up objects from a lot of new angles and from greater distances and basically follow it in a lot of new different angles and from different paths, just because of all these sensors and how big the sensor size is and how much image it can capture. So Active Track 5.0 and APAS 5.0 are definitely huge advancements that do give it an edge over the Air 2S. So if you're someone who's looking for the absolute best DJI drone at tracking and you really need to follow subjects quite frequently, I would definitely recommend taking a look at the Mavic 3 for that specific use case, because it's pretty phenomenal at that specific area. Okay, so as we come to the end of this video, is the Mavic 3 twice as better compared to the DJI Air 2S? And the answer is simply no. If you're a photographer, get the DJI Air 2S. If you're a hobbyist, get the DJI Air 2S. If you don't ever shoot slow motion with your drone, get the DJI Air 2S. If you couldn't tell the difference between the footages that I played throughout this video or the photographs that I showed, then get the DJI Air 2S. Now, if you're a professional who actually earns money with their equipment, so if you're buying a drone and you're doing professional gigs, then yes, the Mavic 3 is definitely worth it. You won't be disappointed with the amazing picture quality that it provides. Additionally, the Cine version has Apple ProRes. So if you're someone who delivers to a lot of clients that require Apple ProRes, then yes, the Cine version is totally worth it for you. But the amount of people that I found that actually fall into this use case are actually quite limited. So most people will not need Apple ProRes. If you don't use Apple ProRes today, you don't need Apple ProRes. The question isn't if the Mavic 3 is better than the DJI Air 2S. We know that the Mavic 3 is a more superior drone. The question is the Mavic 3 worth that crazy price tag when the Air 2S is so reasonably priced? And the answer is no. 99% of people will be completely happy with the DJI Air 2S. So if that's the drone that you're still flying, or if you're trying to decide what drone you're trying to buy and you're not like the utmost prosumer or a professional in this field or in this hobby, then I highly recommend that most people get the DJI Air 2S. You will not be disappointed. Now that's it for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys learned something new, and if you did, as always, leave a like at the bottom of the page, smash that like button. It really helps out the video and it does make a really big difference. If you guys are into drones, photography, content creation, all that kind of stuff, then definitely consider subscribing to the channel. I would really appreciate it. Other than that, that's all I have for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, keep creating.